Welcome to this week's edition of In the Clubhouse with EMD Baseball. I'm Andy Kirikides, joined by my co-host Keith Glasser, who's got all the EMD gear on today. How we doing, man?
Great. How are you?
Good.
I went EMD, and I'm going to take a shot at Jonathan. Jonathan had something come up. The kids are sick and he can't come, so like this is not a personal shot at him. But I specifically wore all my EMD stuff because I have zero elite national stuff. So it was supposed to be more of I was going to get into Jonathan on this podcast, and then the kids are sick, and you know we all of us out there who are parents know like when the kids are sick, it's pure chaos. So it's nothing personal. It was a planned ambush that I had. And I think I'm more upset that I can't ambush him. So I'm just doing it now. So when he listens to this in another 5 days or whatever, he knows.
Fair enough. Love you, Jonathan. All right. So we've gotten some questions around the changes that have come through as a result of the Health versus NCAA. One of them in particular is people have been asking about, well, what's going to happen now that there's no more national letter of intent, the NLI, not to be confused with the NIL, which is name, image, and likeness. But that's come up. Just want to take a couple minutes to give a brief overview of, yes, there's change, but fundamentally not a ton of change. The specifics of it make it a little bit different. But there's still going to be some legally binding documentation that's going to happen. We'll get into some of the stuff that we've heard from some coaches that we've talked to about what they intend to do and how this is all going to work. But I'll pass it over to you for some of the specifics and why this change has happened and how it's tied into some of the other legislation that is likely to pass here this spring.
Sure. So the NLI is gone, the National Letter of Intent. Essentially what they're doing, it doesn't mean that you're not going to sign and you're not going to be binded to a school. Seemingly in the knee-jerk reaction that this is over the last couple days, the week really, I guess, is that you will be signing a financial aid agreement. You know, it could be with merit scholarship money from the sport. I think some of that is still kind of getting worked out in the finer details, the minutia, if you will. But essentially what's going to happen is schools are going to be able to offer kids whatever it is. And this is surrounding that $2.8 billion B with a billion with a B, payout for the NIL stuff, name, image, and likeness that's going to be going, plus the upcoming revenue share for all the student athletes that are going to be able to revenue share with all the money that's being made. They want to have a little bit of latitude in being able to, figure out how that money is going to be used, how you're going to get it. And with the NLI, National Letter of Intent, they can't necessarily do that this way. So they're kind of scrapping the NLI and introducing this new form of signing, if you will. I think one of the bigger changes that are coming out of this, and this is all kind of surface level stuff until this all gets finalized. And I think it's going to court to be finalized in April of 2025. So there's still going to be a lot of things they're going to work out. But seemingly what it is that once you sign, you are done and no one else can recruit you, which is going to be interesting in some sports where you see people flipping recruits later in the year and later in the cycle, and guys that decommit or get decommitted. Once you sign, you are not able to be decommitted or talk to another school until you're out of that 1 year agreement, it seems like. Now, the timing too, we talked about before we got on, you're still going to be seemingly coaches at the Division I level will still be bound by the contact rules where they can offer 26s when they want and sign them early, if they will, and preclude anyone else from talking to them. So that's going to be something that's going to be a little bit interesting moving into the next recruiting cycle. But that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it. Like you're still going to sign financial aid, merit scholarship money, baseball money, or whatever sport it is. But it gives the schools latitude with the revenue share and stuff to be able to distribute that money how they see fit. And under the current system, that's not really allowed.
Yeah, well stated. I think it's important to recognize there's still going to be legal documentation that is going to be signed at some point in the process. Having talked to some coaches, it sounds like they're going to stick to a very similar timeline as the NLI exists now, which is that early November, late October timeline. Changes a little bit year to year, but it sounds like that's when they would have the 2026 class sign their documentation. They would do the same thing with the 2025 class. Obviously, we're creeping up on that deadline now. It's going to be really interesting to see how coaches handle the signing of these legal documentation, because I could see some coaches going in the direction of trying to get players to sign this documentation upon the offer being made. So there's 2026s out there that have already, done their whole verbal commitment in their Twitter posts. Although I have seen a rash of still not committed posts of kids posting in uniforms post-visit, which is weird to me, but I digress. Back to the topic at hand. Coaches could potentially have, at least the way that it's written right now, and like I said, maybe some of these details come to light a little bit later when everything ultimately gets finalized. But, if you're a school that has an ultra projectable guy that you have committed, you may want that kid to sign as soon as possible and remove the possibility of another school swooping in and trying to recruit him. That would also bind you to not decommitting that kid. I think most schools will probably stick to the normal timeline because you do want to have that flexibility, because we all know that some kids just don't get better, and you love them in August of their going into their junior year, and fast forward another year and they're the same exact guy, and all of a sudden he's not good enough. It happens all the time. We're going to release a podcast on this particular topic here soon. So I think the big thing is how coaches are going to handle it in my eyes. I don't think a ton has changed. I think, to your point, a lot of this has to do with flexibility and being able to factor in the revenue sharing model that's going to get finalized for a lot of these schools. For some schools, this is not going to be a factor from a revenue sharing perspective. There's not any revenue that's going to go to them. So it doesn't really affect a lot of schools, I don't think. But yeah, NLI is gone. It's something that's been around for a long time. It's been the only legally binding, documentation in this process, but it's just going to get replaced. It's just going to get replaced by other legally binding documentation that's going to have an outline of the financial aid and the merit-based money and the athletic scholarship money. And if there is NIL money, I'm sure it's going to be outlined in there as well, to the point around the revenue sharing. So I think change, but ultimately not a ton of change, but it is something to be aware of and understand that, yes, the system is changing a little bit and it could impact you depending on, where you land in the grand scheme of Division I college baseball. So I think we covered that. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's the most up to date we can be in with the current information that we have.
We'll keep you updated as more news comes out regarding this legislation and the new rules. If you want a little bit of a refresher, go back to the podcast that was released October 14th, and we outlined some of the updates regarding the House versus NCAA legislation. Still stuff that'll likely get clarified as we get a little bit closer, and we'll be sure to grab some time to discuss that and make sure that all you wonderful listeners out there are up to speed on what's happening with NCAA baseball and NCAA recruiting broadly. Until next week, thanks for listening, everybody. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.